John Boyer, so wonderful to see you, my friend.
Likewise, Donato, and congratulations.
Well, my congrats to all of you who have been a part of this journey. I thank all of you.
Well, you're the leader.
Hello, Governor. How are
Hello.
you?
Are you still in Virginia?
No, I just announced that the backdrop, of course, is beautiful St. Joseph's College, but I'm in Pennsylvania. I'm visiting my 92-year-old mother on my way back to Maine.
Bless you. That's terrific. We're in Pennsylvania.
Westchester, outside of Philadelphia.
Okay. Yeah.
No, that's my roots.
That's your roots.
Yeah.
The big rivalry between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia.
Yes, I know. I know. Well,
this is Kathy. I'm outside of Pittsburgh, so don't say anything bad about Southwestern PA. Excuse me.
Oh, well, thank you for giving me that forewarning. I appreciate it. My best friend in Congress is Mike Doyle, and he represents Pittsburgh in Congress, so I could never go against Pittsburgh.
Good comeback.
Oh, he's been there. So he went into '94 with me. He's now chairing some energy and regulatory. So anyways.
Yep.
So we've just got about 2 more minutes, and we'll allow all the clicks to keep clicking and everyone joining. And then we'll do introductions.
Hi, Joanne. I don't know if you see me. It's Tom, but for some reason my video is not working. I'm going to try coming in again.
Okay, Tom. Great. The most important thing is that you get to see our panelists, and that will start shortly.
Oh, camera's not on. No, the system's on. Yeah, actually it does. Yep. Okay. Oh, I thought that was Diane from Florence.
You good? You want this open? You want this open? No. Close. Huh? Close.
Aloha, Gregory.
Aloha, Donato. Great to see you.
Oh, likewise. Jeff is going to want to say hi to you.
He just texted me.
Oh, wonderful. Greg just became the CEO of a YMCA. I know you're all going to feel sorry for him in Hawaii. What a wonderful promotion and wonderful location.
I was going to say, come on and visit. Be happy to have you.
Well, I don't think you're going to be short of any visitors.
And plenty of room to host you as well, and lots to see and do if you've never been here.
Well, Jeff and I are looking forward to visiting you and Sebastian.
Excellent.
Well, I'd like to welcome everyone. Welcome to St. Joseph's College of Maine and our discussion on compassionate leadership. My name is Joanne Bean. I'm the Vice President and Chief Advancement Officer here at our beautiful college. And before I introduce today's distinguished speakers, I'd like to go through some details about just the flow of this event and how it's going to work for all of us. So you will note that you have a microphone, and I'd ask you to please keep that microphone on mute. And if you don't, we'll do that for you. And the reason for that is really because of background noise. It becomes difficult with all the microphones on. Sometimes there's interceptions, and we'd like to avoid that if possible. In addition, we are going to go through this wonderful presentation from 4 to 5:30. The first part being, of course, the panelists and our speakers, and then the second part being an opportunity for you, participants, to ask questions, to engage in discussion. And I'll ask you to do that, please, by entering your questions in the chat function box. As you do that, you can do it throughout the presentation so that you can keep track of those questions that you'd like to ask. And then at the end, we'll of course address them specifically to individuals or as a general question that Donato will facilitate. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce to you who will be leading this discussion. And that individual, many of you have heard of, certainly know personally, and his name is Donato Tramuto. Donato is the honorary scholar in residence here at St. Joseph's College. He is a distinguished member of our community, serving in many capacities, involved in many initiatives, including our new Institute for Integrative Aging. And Donato is certainly a leader in many respects from a huge global capacity as a healthcare activist, a philanthropist, and certainly many of you know him as a CEO. He is the founder of the Tramuto Foundation and Healthy Villages, two entities that are near and dear to his heart, and he may be discussing them throughout today's presentation. He is that leader in a movement right now that is bringing us to consider the need for compassionate leadership, the need for dignity and respect in our workforce, in our communities, in our homes. And that is the reason why we are here today, to hear about his finished manuscript, not the entire book, but his second book, which is tentatively titled Compassionate Leadership, but I think we're all going to find out about that when it is published later this year. So it is my pleasure to introduce Donato Tramuto. Donato, thank you so much for joining us today and for bringing together these three distinguished panelists and your facilitation of this discussion. Please, Donato.
Thank you, Joanne. I think as you get to 65, you're wondering whether your obituary is being read. So I hope that that's not the case. Well, first of all, let me, if I may, express my profound gratitude to St. Joseph's College. They have been front and center to this initiative around compassionate leadership. And all of you who are here today, I'm kind of reminded by the great comment that President John Kennedy made in 1962 when he brought all the Nobel laureates to the White House. He looked around the room and he said, there's never been this many intelligent people gathering at one time, except for when Thomas Jefferson dined here all by himself. And so it is really great to have all of you with your great intellectual knowledge of this need for compassion. And I'd like to, if I may, give you a little bit of how I landed on this, this second book. As you know, I retired last year from my responsibilities as CEO of Tivity Health. And in those years when I was traveling and meeting so many seniors and meeting so many investors, there is a story that I still recall here today when I was trying to explain to a Wall Street investor about the need to have food as perhaps a benefit for our healthcare, moving our dollars from the sick care to healthcare. And to this day, I remember what this young analyst said to me: that's not our problem. The person who can't buy food should have gotten a better education and should be doing things to help themselves. And I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. Mm-hmm. And I think when we look at the last year, the social unrest that was there long before the George Floyd incident, the loneliness that's come out of the pandemic, the countless number of lives that have been lost and lives that have been suffering through this pandemic, the reality that close to 20% of the US population today could not aggregate $400 for an emergency fund. It all points, in my belief, to the need for compassion and kindness. In that situation where the investor basically blew my comment off with his answer, imagine if he could have only understood the compassionate side of that individual who cannot afford to buy food, the individual who's making a decision every single day about whether to take their drugs or to eat, or the individual who wants to go to school, however, has never been given the chance to have their tuition supported by an entity that could allow them to fulfill their dreams. I can go on and on and on. And so I had this idea of dismissing the notion. For years. Many people have said to me, Donato, compassionate leadership is weak leadership. And I wanted to dismiss that notion in this book, and I believe we have. I also wanted to provide the knowledge of other people who have led with compassion. And today we're going to hear from 3 very distinguished leaders who have led with compassion. And so we not only wanted to interview 37, 38 leaders, we also wanted to conduct a survey, and we did that, of 1,500 people across the United States to compare their perception of how leaders are leading today with compassion to the 37, 38 individuals we interviewed to see if there was a disconnect. And we're going to talk more about that later in this webinar. So in my book, to be released in September, we challenge both established and emerging leaders to see compassion in a different light, to see it as a strength, a critical skill, and as an imperative to how we lead going forward. We debunk popular sentiments among some leaders who suggest that compassion and kindness are weak. In fact, we demonstrate in this book how leaders can be strong, how they can be firm and tough while sticking to these principles. And we make the case that compassion is your power. We also dismiss the notion that in organizations, it's getting the culture right first. And we'll talk more about that, right? You hear so often, culture eats strategy for lunch. Well, we dismiss that in this book. It's not getting the culture first. It's actually getting the trust first. So let's get right to it. My distinguished panel of experts today include 3 of the 38 leaders that we interviewed. Governor John Baldacci, who I have been fortunate to know, this amazing leader for nearly 2 decades. Many of you know him as the governor of Maine. I know him as a compassionate individual who has followed his father and mother's mantra. What have you done for the people today, John? An amazing individual who led the state of Maine with compassion. And let me tell you this, if anyone doubts that, I would ask you to look at the years after the governor left office and the enormous struggle we had in getting the new governor to recognize the importance of providing Medicaid, which was a federally program to provide Medicaid for all people. The governor was one of the first governors who stepped forward and literally wrote what healthcare reform has looked like under the Obama administration. Governor, it's indeed a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Donato. A very generous and warm introduction. Thank you.
Our next panelist, Dr. James DeLucos. Jim became the 14th president of St. Joseph's College in 2012, and soon thereafter, I became associated with the college through Joanne Bean. And I have to tell you, under his leadership, the college is pursuing a series of ambitious initiatives. Joanne mentioned the integrative aging program that I have been a part of since 2015. He is not afraid to be courageous. That's what I love about you, Jim. You are not afraid to take on some of the thorniest issues. I watched and observed how you handled the pandemic with the students. It was one of first compassion, and then let's get to the strategy. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Your decades of commitment to being a voice in higher education has been an exemplary step forward in terms of how we can lead with compassion. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Donato. Happy to be here. Excited for the conversation. And
it is my really distinct honor here today to introduce another amazing leader, Reverend Becca Stevens. Before I get to the introduction, I first met Becca when Jeff and I moved to Nashville in 2015, soon after taking on the role at Activity Health. And as you know, I studied for the Roman Catholic priesthood and still maintain a very active commitment to my faith. However, when I met Becca, I felt for the first time a sense of inclusion, a sense of real authenticity around how you can express your faith in a way where you can bring laughter and joy and spiritual sense of belonging to others. She is a well-known speaker, a social entrepreneur, an author, a priest, founder of 8 nonprofit enterprises, and one that I love, which is Thistle Farms. You can Google her great work there. She has been featured on PBS NewsHours, The Today Show, ABC World News, named a CNN hero, and quite frankly, is a hero to many, many, many people. I have to share with you, when we interviewed Becca, it was, I think, Becca, like 36 hours after the unexpected loss of your brother-in-law. And talk about courage. Her brother-in-law, I believe, was in his 50s, did not die from COVID, but had a massive heart attack. And here she is, wanting to be part of our movement around compassionate leadership. And not only was she involved in this interview, but she was already doing all of the right things for her sister in terms of planning the funeral. Even, Becca, I hope I'm not revealing personal stuff, but it was a memory that is etched in my memory forever. She basically reached out to her sister-in-law and family and said, I'm taking care of this funeral. Talk about compassion. And so it's a pleasure to have Becca here today, and a pleasure to have all 3 of you as part of this webinar.
Thank you, Donato. That is a generous and kind thing. And I'll let my sister know that everybody thought of her husband, John, at this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca.
Well, before we get into, we have put together a number of questions, but I think it would be really wrong for us in terms of talking about compassion if I didn't ask this question. And let me kind of couch it in the following way. Certain moments in life have the power, I think, to shift our core sense of being. The death of a parent, the birth of a child, an incurable disease. The last 14 months specifically has been very painful for us in many, many ways. But I want to zero in on the verdict this past week in the George Floyd murder case. And I want to quote what Congressman Joe Kennedy said, because I think he said it very well. A shred of justice was served this past week. I think it would be wrong for us to think that total justice was served. But my question to the 3 panelists is, how can we move forward as a nation? To what degree will compassion and kindness be the currency that we need to ensure that we don't move on from this one event to another event, and we all kind of gather and we focus in on that incident, but we don't have the sustainable change that I think we all are looking for? Could you all just share your perspective before we get into the questions on the book? What can we do to move forward, and not only to honor the memory of George Floyd and his family, but to honor once and for all the need for transformative change that could bring us all together in a way that we recognize everyone for who they are and for what they are? Who would like to go first? Jim?
Sure, I'll be happy to, Donato. Thanks. Thank you for that. You know, I think that over the last year, we have, because of the situation with George Floyd's death, and the fact that it was something that we could all see painfully over and over again, right? It gave us access to a reality that most of us prior to that, couldn't imagine. And I think the ability to see the pain and the suffering, to see what the bystanders were saying and trying to do, to really, thanks to the courageous action of those who chose to step in and videotape it, allowed us to understand something that most of us would never be able to understand, right? And I think that was the beginning. Those are the beginnings of compassion, right? The ability to stand in someone else's shoes, to see what someone else is seeing, to feel what someone else is feeling. So I think that was a really kind of a different than in many of the cases. Most of the time when there are these horrific shootings, unjustified shootings of folks, we get 20 seconds of body cam, or 5 seconds of something, or but to be able to be forced to watch this as it dragged out over 9+ minutes, it's impossible not to feel compassion, to understand this is not the world most of us move in. So that was the beginning of this. And I think the verdict the other day really is really a kind of a next step, right? A validation that what so many people felt for so long, in fact, is a shared feeling, right? And so I think what happens next is really important, right? What will we do with this moment? How will this energy be driven forward? So I think and even while we waited for the trial and for the verdict, we have more shootings, more both in situations like this, the use of force by police officers, just random acts of violence. We had on Sunday itself, we have 3 multiple death shootings on Sunday in different parts of the country. So I think all of this is really calling us to sit with what this means about who we are. And so I think this is a great time to talk about compassion and about compassionate leadership and about the roles that we each can play in that project. So those are my sort of initial thoughts on the question you asked.
Thank you very much. And Becca, maybe we can hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I'm part of a community called Thistle Farms. And Thistle Farms works with women survivors of trafficking, addiction, people who've been prostituted, people who have known injustice is some of the first places in their lives. And so, this story is not a new story, and we've been wrestling with it since the beginning, almost 25 years ago for us. What was interesting for us this year, so many of the women who come into the community of Thistle Farms, and we have about 550 beds around the country. We're in 20 other countries with global partnerships. But in Nashville, where I am right now, there's about 6 houses, then there's a big manufacturing facility, and the women come there and they make bath and body care products, and we were considered essential workers. So everybody was still coming to work, and we were making hand sanitizer, all these things. And when people started putting on their masks, it was a massive trigger, the masks over their faces, because so many people had been maybe gagged or, hands over the mouth during their sexual assaults and violence. And so I felt like we were watching what was happening in the country, almost like on steroids. It was so intense over there, especially during the summer months. And what I think I learned was really the antagonists in the compassion story. The antagonists are both, our cynicism, fear, and trauma is also a big problem if you're trying to feel compassion. So it's not just about like I'm hateful if I'm not compassionate. It could be I'm in my own trauma, I'm in my own fear, and I'm scared. And the lesson that I learned out of it, Tramuto, when you say, what is it that, Donato or Mr. Tramuto, I don't know which one you want me to call. I think is just
don't call me late for dinner.
Yes. But what I think really what the point for me is that we have to continue to stay together. If you want this compassionate world where we're coming together, just because it's really hard, just because people in the community are really mad at each other for the racism within our own communities, just because people are mad because they were incarcerated for way too long or knew poverty for way too long. When we can create a compassionate community and stay together, justice becomes a way of life. So it's not this like, okay, George Floyd shooting, look over here. Breonna, look over here. The mass shooting in Texas, look over here. And we get this whiplash justice. We make a commitment to keep justice as a way of life with compassion as one of the headers. And we move forward in that posture. And above all, what I believe more than anything is when a community stays together, you know, there's always hope for it. We may not solve it, but maybe we're bringing up a wave that we can pass on to the beautiful next generation, even on this webinar, that can carry it.
Well said, Becca and Jim. Governor, your thoughts would be appreciated. You were, for many years, in an elected position. How do you look at how we can move forward?
Donato, I really appreciate both the president, Jim, and also Becca and their comments, because I think that all of those comments kind of build upon each other. And I think that sometimes people feel overwhelmed as to what they can do to right the wrong. And I'm reminded when Bobby Kennedy was in Cape Town, South Africa, and he spoke to the oppression and the discrimination that was taking place there. And he said that maybe one person alone can't do it. And he referred to great people throughout history, Joan of Arc and others who were able to do things. But what's important is that maybe from a million different centers of energy and daring comes the ripples of hope and opportunity. And from that, you get a cascade. It rushes down the walls of resistance and discrimination. And I think that we have got to walk in, we have to understand that we cannot judge people by the color of their skin, but we have to by the content of their character. We have to look at people as people and be humane in our treatment and recognize that we're all in it together. You know, and that we all have a responsibility to move this big ocean liner in the right direction. So I feel that, you know, that there'll be laws that'll be passed, there'll be resolutions put forward, but I hearken back to the fact that we in our individual lives, and I think it will, Donato, this is a moment that I think, as you pointed out, will really turn the tide in terms of this issue, and that the pressure will continue to build.
Thank you, Governor. If I may now connect all three of your comments so that I can bring it back to the book. What I heard all three communicate, which is what we uncovered in the book, in the research, countless hours of research assessment. And I want to give tribute to my wonderful staff. Catherine and Katie are here, and I don't know if Adam is here, and Tammy, but they all worked diligently on this book. And as I could see them smiling, this was not 5 minutes of data assessment, these were hours. But what we found, which I think can be tied into what you're saying, Becca, Jim, and the governor, is it's not going to be one person anymore. Mm-hmm. We're all looking for the Dr. Martin Luther Kings and the Bobby Kennedys and the Dalai Lama and, you know, whoever your hero is, or whoever your hero might have been, it's going to be us. Mm-hmm. And what we've learned about this book, and the reason why it was accepted so quickly by a publisher, is because they thought this was no longer just a book, it's a movement. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be, and I love your mention of Bobby Kennedy's famous Ripple of Hope speech in 1966. I've been honored to receive the Ripple of Hope Award in 2014. And when I look at the bust of Bobby Kennedy that was presented to me by Ethel Kennedy, what it is a reminder of is not what we have accomplished, but what we need to still accomplish. There is much more work that needs to be done, and it's going to be all of us working together. The second point that we learned from our leaders is they didn't have a versation with people. They had a conversation with people. Too much, and I think it's where Becca was heading, too much of what I think has created this this lack of kindness is we don't take the time to truly connect and understand the stories of other people. One of the most significant chronic conditions of the 21st century right now is loneliness, and it's all tied to the lack of compassion, the lack of listening to the stories of other people. And the more we understood the compassionate leadership profiles of the people we interviewed, the one common trait is that they took the time to listen and they took the time to have a conversation. So we appreciate your comments on this specific event of the week. I really do think that the new currency going forward is kindness and compassion. And if we can show that every single day, perhaps we can unify what has been an enormous, not just year, but it's been many, many decades of fighting for the same issues that Dr. King and Robert Kennedy gave their lives for. So to the group, the one common question we asked from all of those who were interviewed is, what does compassionate leadership mean to you? And I would be interested if you could share, and we don't want to get into every aspect of the book, otherwise you won't read it. So we're going to be very careful to contain this. But Governor, let's start with you. What does compassionate leadership mean to you?
I think, Donato, I think it means that I have to put myself in the position of the person I'm talking to or working with or have adversity with in some fashion. I have to understand their point of view. I have to give them respect. I may not agree with them. I may need to, share with them, my feelings. But I think, as you pointed out so eloquently, I think it's about listening to people, putting yourself in their position. I always said, John, you could be in that position. Wouldn't you want somebody to listen to you, to have access to tell you what their problems are and to share with you? And I was very lucky, as I told you, Donato. My father was a big Kennedy delegate in 1960, and he believed in Camelot. He believed in the inspiration and hope that was being provided. And he always had a thing about, what did you do for the people today? So I had somebody putting that pressure on me every single day when I came home, and he was washing dishes. And he told me, he says, I'm not washing dishes for my health. He says, I'm doing it so you can serve the people in Augusta. What did you do for the people today? I said, Dad, I got to set up the bar. I got to get things, customers coming in. He said, no, you tell me. And I was very fortunate. My parents were very good in terms of making sure we were well-grounded in that regard, and always about treating people. And I'll close by saying, my dad always said, life is like a glass. Whatever you get out of it is what you pour into it. And I think that it's just done on an individual basis. But
I'm going to come back in a moment to what your father challenged you on, but I'd like to hear Becca, compassionate leadership. What does it mean to you? Becca, you're muted.
Sorry, I was trying to be polite and be muted. Sorry. I was saying that I think it's evolved for me over the years that I've served as both as a pastor and as a leader of several different groups of folks. But the main thing is that for me has been transitioning from thinking that I need to be a hero into being a host. I think too many times in the work of leadership and justice, we think we have to be these heroic people. And it really goes back, Donato, to what you were talking about earlier, and like being good with being a host, meaning I need to be good with setting the table, washing the dishes, Governor, with, making sure there's time and resources for people to do their own heroic work. And it lets me feel a lot more compassionate towards the folks that I'm serving as a host versus thinking, you have to do what I need you to do because I need to be the hero of this story. And that's an exhausting way to live. The other thing, I think for me about being a compassionate hero, first of all, I learned from a woman who was graduating from our 2-year residential program. And the 2-year residential program means women live together in a home and they do all this amazing work. And her name is Lee. you know, and her story, like all the stories for the women I work with, is just horrific, including, you know, being kidnapped, and she was in Memphis and they shaved her head and kept her in the back of a house where she had to whisper to somebody that had come back there, when you leave, no matter what, call 911. I'm just trying to get out. So she's telling me this story, and all of a sudden it goes from, here's the statistics around women who are trafficked globally, to the story of Lee. And I'm full of compassion because it's full of story. And I can engage that story. And then she said to me, when you talk about how love heals, which is the mantra of our community at Thistle Farms, she said, the first thing I have to do is trust you. So for me to be a compassionate leader, I feel like I need to be consistent and caring over and over again, so that you trust me to do whatever it is I need to do in the leadership role at that point, so that love can do its healing work. You know, the last thing I would say on compassionate leadership for me in the communities that I work in, anywhere in the world, whether it's in the hills of Rwanda or the valley in Mexico, by the river in Ecuador, right here in Nashville, Tennessee, or with our sister community in Maine, Sophia's house, the most important thing to do sometimes is just to give praise and credit, to say, Donato, you're amazing. What a great job. This is a great success already. Just to keep, you know, I don't know how you thought of this book. What's a beautiful book. I think sometimes leaders are afraid to really give the praise and credit in a community and still know you have a place.
Yeah, it reminds me of a great line, Becca. The only time we say well done is when we order a steak. It's so easy to say well done. A great commentary. Jim, it's very interesting. I'm not going to stay on script with the questions because you all are bringing such great points, and I'm going to have some follow-up questions in a moment, but I want to hear Jim's definition of, you know, compassionate leadership.
Thanks, Donato. Well, I think I'm gonna begin by continuing the dining metaphor, which seems to be the dominant part of the last part of this conversation. You know, so when we like to have people over for dinner, and there are certain things that I very much like to cook because they taste good when I finished, right? But over the years, I've learned that I need to ask people before they come what they don't like to eat, what food aversions they might have, to include things, you know, allergies, those kinds of things, so that when we prepare meals for folks, it is not coming out of our desire to show off, but out of what will make them feel comfortable and make them feel welcomed, right? And I think that's a segue to the bigger point, which is that when you walk into a room as a leader, you have to understand that everyone is not aligned for all kinds of reasons. In fact, there may be more disalignment of people in that room than anything else, right? And the task is to make sure that everyone feels welcome and everyone feels included, and then to actually sort of listen carefully if you're having a conversation for those moments when someone's inadvertently, in most cases, says something which you know is going to rub someone else the wrong way, is going to set off one of those signals, is going to be, you know, is going to feel like a microaggression, and the need to be able to understand the dynamic in that space, and to understand that if we are going to actually come out of that space, having made some progress and moved forward in a way that everyone feels included, we have to tend to that part of the dynamic, you know, and that's something I've learned over the years. You know, I learned it in the classroom over a long period of time with students. I've learned it in various kinds of group settings. It wasn't something that I understood when I first began teaching. And I have a couple more stories, but I'll save them for a different time. But I think that's what it amounts to now, is that ability to understand that we don't all begin in the same place.
Great points from all of you. I'm going to zero in on a few of them. And Governor, I'd like to zero this one in on you. One of the leaders that we interviewed had a great line. You rent your title, but you own your dignity and integrity. Governor, you've had a number of impressive titles in your career, congressman, governor. How did you preserve your sense of integrity and dignity in following the lessons that you learned at home. Obviously, you didn't become a compassionate leader, you know, overnight. It was time that you developed those skills. And so how were you able to separate what sometimes I think happens to leaders is that they get the title and they then forget what their real role and their real responsibility is. How did you manage that? Because I'm going to share with all of you, I met the governor 15 years ago, and I'm telling you, I never would have known that he, at that time, was the governor of Maine. He made me feel so important, and he listened to my story. Governor, I don't know if you remember, you walked up the steps of Cafe Prego. You were with your wonderful wife, Karen. You had your security personnel there. However, you were so down to earth. You made Jeff and I feel at that moment that we were the most important individuals you were talking to. How did you maintain that?
First of all, it was, you know, being raised in a large family of 8 brothers and sisters. If you ever thought too much of yourself, there was always somebody to tap your head and take the air out of your walk. But my father and mother said to me that you got to treat people the way you want to be. There are 3 things in order to be successful in life: treating people the way you want to be treated, making sure that you didn't think yourself any better than anybody else, and working hard. Those are the 3 keys that were passed to me that I passed to future generations in my graduation speeches and my seminars participated. It is not rocket science, but my dad and mom were such a big influence on me in terms of making sure that those 3 things were followed, that was the advice. And he'd always test me about what did I do for the people today? This day, I'm not in office, but what did I do? Well, I participated in helping a Kiwanis Club raise a fundraising schedule so that they could meet their annual expenses. I answered a call of an individual. I mean, I would literally go through this on a daily basis because I knew that I got my father looking down at me saying, what did you do for the people today? And I was very lucky. We grew up in a family that wanted to be outgoing, wanted to do things, not just earn a paycheck, but do things in the community. All my brothers and sisters, you know Rosemary and Lisa very well. You know, the girls are just as probably more bright and dedicated and hardworking behind the scenes and getting things done. And my brothers have been involved. And one's a state senator, the other one's a county commissioner. And then my brother Bob was chairing the Finance Authority of Maine. So we've all been involved in this process. So it's a family affair for us.
So Governor, let me ask you, with the idea that compassion breeds compassion, and I want to tailgate off of what Becca stated, do you believe that when government truly focuses on the need of people, compassion can flourish in the communities across our country?
I think that President Biden is the ideal president to have at this very difficult time and culturally changing time, because he's not afraid to stand up and be counted. He's not afraid to be called too liberal or too far to the left. He's doing what he needs to do in order to make sure that our country can move ahead together. And he's very much in tune with those things. And I think you got terrific leadership, and you've got the opportunity now for the examples to be set so that, you know, in the restaurant business, as you were saying earlier, in the restaurant business, as you were saying earlier, that, you know, there weren't very many people at first that were in the non-smoking section. You had to sort of walk through the smoking section to get to the few tables that had non-smoking. Now you can't even smoke near a restaurant, inside a restaurant. These are cultural changes that happen over time. And I believe that with his leadership and with our willingness to be part of that effort on a daily basis in our own lives, the 2 of us will create enough power to wash down those walls. And that's my goal in life.
Well said. And Becca, it brings me to a provocative message that will be in the book, and it tailgates off of what you said about trust. In the book, we devote an entire chapter to saying that most leaders approach their new responsibilities in addressing the culture. And what we say is throw that approach out the window. You have to get the trust first. Harvard did a study a number of years ago, and they said the problems in healthcare is not cost or quality. The problem in healthcare is that nobody trusts one another. The payers, don't trust the hospitals. The pharmaceutical companies don't trust the physicians. If you could get trust back into the healthcare system, cost would go down and quality would go up. And this is what we're finding with compassion, is that we jump in to address the culture when we haven't built the trust, and then we go around with a pooper scooper and we try to pick up the mess. And so when you hear that, how have you, as an amazing leader in so many venues, how have you approached trust first before you approach the culture of values and mission and vision, et cetera?
Well, that's a big question. And I hope I do. I hope I've earned people's trust in that way. I think the first thing for us always is to create the safe space, so you have time and space to begin to build that trust. It doesn't happen overnight. I think for all of us, part of how we build trust and compassion is that I think some of us think as compassionate leaders, we have to go out and change the world, that the calling of our faith and our life and our money and our prestige is to go out and change the world. But truly, if you look at the truth of, the Gospels and the truth of the meaning of life, our goal is to love the world, not to try to change it. The goal is for us to love the world. You can't do that without compassion. But if I'm going to love the world, then I need to be willing to still change so I can love the world better. And I think part of how people learn to trust you is if they think there's a little bit of you that is willing to change, but just by the fact that you're in a relationship with them, that you're still open. That offers compassion. That means I'm not approaching it. I've heard every story in the book from every woman who is coming out of prison. But I think, no, this is the first time I've heard your story. And I'm willing to have it impact me and help me formulate what compassion looks like. The other thing I think always is, it's not, saying, Donato, trust me, Donato, trust me. It's if I'm living in a way that you think, you know what, she's trustworthy. She is worthy of it. The very last point on all of this to me is, I'm from the South. This is Nashville, Tennessee. So I grew up, my mom, Governor, would go around and she had a casserole in the back seat just in case, because if anything happened to anybody, she wanted to bring a casserole by. And a casserole, back in the day, that just meant mushroom soup with chips on top of it and some chicken on the bottom. And what I learned about that was all that, it didn't matter what it was. It could have been anything in that back seat. But this radical hospitality, this restaurant metaphor we keep going to, this food metaphor, that we offer this place so that we can begin to trust, engage each other's story so that we can love each other and then love the world better.
Amen.
Boy, music to my hearing aids.
Yeah.
Becca, I have to follow up on this one because many people will say that we don't need to take the time to listen to people's stories. We have technology, we can Google, we can find out everything about a person. Katie Couric, who is also one of the 37 leaders that have been interviewed for this book, she and I are working in partnership on this issue of loneliness. And we are finding an enormous disconnect with technology, where we all thought that technology could handle this sense of connection, yet it's not happening. And so if you had to leave one lesson to this group today, because I am with you, the more we take the time to listen to one's stories, the more we increase that individual's sense of relevancy. You are an ambassador for doing that. I have watched you in action. I've watched you when I first met you. You took the time to really understand Donato, and I hope that I did the same in return. However, not everyone finds this an easy thing to do. What lesson or advice could you provide to this group in terms of how to take the time to really accept and listen to a person's story?
You know, I just want to say that the stories of other people have had the biggest impact on my life and my faith and my vocation. I mean, everybody that you've asked a question to, Donato, the governor, the president, you know, everybody that you've asked a question to has, you know, a story. And what I love is that the stories I've heard over the years have formed me. You know, I am not confused anymore about the myths out there about why women are on the streets or how women come off the streets. I'm not confused about the injustices in our prison systems and the, you know, gender-based violence and the vulnerability of poverty. I'm not confused about those things because I've heard so many stories and I feel so in line and compassionate with women survivor leaders. You know, I think for me, one of the stories of all of them that stood out was the time, very first time I stood with a woman named Doris, who, like many women, had seen the inside of prison walls and the underside of bridges and the short side of justice, all this stuff. She had been through all of it. And we were starting a new community in Florida, and she saw the beach for the first time. And she stepped into the ocean and she said, "Oh my gosh, has this been doing this my whole life?" And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, since the moon's been spinning around this earth, we've been asking these questions, right? But what I know is older and deeper than that tide is love. But sometimes it takes a whole community of people to get somebody down to the shore to feel that power and to feel that joy. And what I want is to be in a community that has enough compassion to help the next person get down to the beach and feel the pull of the tide and remember how amazing this world is. So I'm going to listen to stories and be in community and do this with gratitude for my whole life. I'm so grateful I still get to hear a story.
Wonderful. And if I may tie it to the book, what we learned in the book, participants here today, that if you can recognize that the person to whom you meet most likely has a bigger challenge than you. Let me give you a great example. A few weeks ago, Jeff and I had a repairman here at the home fixing our garage door. And I went out and just took the time to ask him about his life. And he started to share with me, he was down, it was a 27-year-old young lad. He started to share with me that his sister-in-law, who has Crohn's disease, was trying to get the insurance company to reimburse for her physician visit. He also started to share that she was incapacitated and in bed, and their 2-year-old, who had not started to speak yet, needed speech pathology programs. I asked him, "Who's the insurance company?" He said, "Humana." I said, "I happen to know the CEO of Humana very well. Wait right here." I went inside and got on the phone and called Bruce Broussard. Didn't get him, so I called Chris Hunter, who is the president of Humana. Long and short, Humana intervened. And our foundation intervened to support, he couldn't pay for the co-pays for his child. That one incident brought this young man to his knees. And he was just shocked that anyone would do that. However, I said to him, "You need to do the same thing now.
Pay it forward.
As you leave this home here today, you're going to meet someone who has it worse than you. If you ask the question of that person, I always started off by, don't tell me what you do, tell me why you do it. Ask about your why." And that we are finding in the book is what the leaders who we interviewed do, is that they not only show empathy. Compassionate leadership is not just about showing empathy. It's doing what Becca, Jim, and the governor have done, and what I know all of you do, otherwise you wouldn't be here. It's taking action. Have empathy, and then move it to action. And so, Jim, I move to you. My favorite philosopher, Yogi Berra, once said, you can observe a lot by just watching. You have had an incredible capacity to watch and observe. This integrative aging is a great example of you watching and observing this enormous disconnect of seniors who are aging and, quite honestly, are not aging with the best of energy and the best of feeling. Can you help the participants understand how you take the time to really listen? That's the one element that I've been so impressed with you, is that you are this quiet thinker and there's so much going on and you move it to action. Can you just express, how did you get those skills? And were they skills that you think you were born with, or are they skills that you developed over your career?
Yeah, thanks, Delano. I'm sure there are many folks who wish I was more quiet than I am. I'll try to answer your question. I think part of it comes out of my experience in higher education for over 3 decades, right? And one of the challenges that higher education has is that it doesn't listen very well. It believes it has all the answers, and it'll be happy to tell you them without stopping to breathe. And as we think about, what the real purpose of higher education, or any education is for that matter, right? To help people find their full capacity. We've got to understand that we need to listen to them and not presume that we know what they need. And again, I could tell you lots of stories of that about that, but I think that's what it comes out of. It's just watching the part of the world where I have found myself, where I pursue my vocation in higher education, and believing it can be better than it is right now. And so, in terms of the integrative aging piece, when we began back in 2014 to sort of work toward the strategic vision for St. Joseph's, we knew we wanted to extend the college's energy in ways that made sense given the college's history and values and traditions, but also that met the real needs of people around us in the community. And as many of us know, Maine has the oldest population in the country. We know the challenges that population faced pre-COVID. We've talked a lot about social isolation and the social determinants of health and the challenges of not having access to broadband and uneven healthcare, and it goes on and on and on. And so the question was, could we do something for this group of people who had done so much for us over the years? And I think we began by thinking about, well, what can we do to help them? And one of the issues was just listening. I think listening to their stories to understand what help meant. Not help from my perspective or the college's perspective, or even frankly from society's perspective, because it became clear that they didn't want to be taken care of. Simply put, they want to be actively involved in the continuing exploration of meaningful life for themselves, right? And so the model of integrative aging is not about taking care of people. It's about helping people be empowered to make decisions on their own that make sense for them. And so that was the core. Then another step along that path was the recognition that we need to stop thinking about our older brothers and sisters as a problem. We often hear about the silver tsunami, right? And I've taken to saying, look, nobody wants to be characterized as this destructive force of nature, which is going to overwhelm and kill all their friends and relatives, right? The metaphor was all wrong, right? And that got us to think about, well, if we're going to change the basic the metaphor, the language we use, and the narratives about aging in this country, where do we have to start? And we went back to the beginning. We've got to begin with our children, right? A lesson we learned, of course, in recycling. If you're going to change the world about recycling, you've got to begin with the kids, not with their parents. So, listening to the various pieces, the project grew and grew and grew, right? And so we have as one of our strategic plan goals, the creation of a vibrant and diverse multi-generational learning community. And it came out of listening and developing and further elaborating on what we were thinking about and talking about. So I think where I learned those skills was being actively involved in believing that the world that I had found myself in, the world of higher education, wasn't perfect and could be changed. I didn't have to simply accept things the way they were. And I think that's a fundamental goal of American higher education, liberal arts education. We want to encourage our students to believe they can change the world around them. But you can only do it effectively if you begin by paying attention to how that world is shaped into the dynamics. So I hope that gets at an answer to the question you asked.
It does, but it elicits another question. As a leader in education, you've had to navigate through millennials who, were told that, they live by entitlement, yet, we know that there's other variables that millennials bring, their ability to advocate. And now you're approaching Generation Z, who have faced similar, same life challenges as previous generations, but in a super connected and rapid moving technology age. And I think one of the characteristics we're seeing with Gen Z is this understanding of racial diversity and this perception of empathy. And so how do you bring it all together in terms of this movement around compassion? And as an educator, what do you see going forward in how your curriculum might change to bring compassionate understanding into your educational campus?
Sure. So occasionally I teach still, not very often, and increasingly less because of the other things going on. But one time I was teaching a class, an English class for upper level English majors at the place I worked previously. They also all happened to be education majors. They were going to be teachers. So we were talking one day, and I said, "So you're all gonna be teachers, right?" "Yeah, we'll all be teachers." I said, "And what are you going to teach?" And they all said, "English." I said, No, you're going to teach people. You're not going to teach English, And I think that gets to the heart of the question you're asking. If we can flip the orientation, we're not teaching disciplines or skills or professions. We're helping people to grow and develop, right? And once we've been talking at St. Joseph's about, what does a mercy the college is sponsored by Sisters of Mercy. What would a mercy-based pedagogy look like, right? A pedagogy which comes out of a sense of compassion, not out of a sense of, did you show up on time? Were you 4 minutes late for class? Did you? But to begin by saying, these are people in front of me who have different needs, who have different desires. To begin with those people, I think, is a way to compassion into the teaching and learning environment, right? And then, of course, to reorient the curriculum in ways that point to those moments in our past or in our present where we can see stunning examples of a lack of compassion, right? And talk about how we got there and why we got there, and talk about where we go next, right? I'm a strong believer that our curriculum needs, in general, at every level, needs to reorient itself from teaching things of the past to the skills that will serve our communities in the future. It can have all of the traditional markers of liberal education, disciplinary education, but it needs to be applied to the real problems of today and tomorrow. And focusing on people and their problems will introduce compassion into the curriculum.
I love that so much. I just want to say, I love that so much. Thank you. That's my big takeaway.
So to all three of you, one of the aspects of the book was, can compassion be taught? We heard some amazing stories of each leader that surface this sense of understanding compassion, but we had some leaders, quite frankly, who didn't start off as compassionate. So can it be taught? Becca, can you teach somebody compassion?
I hope so. But I also think it's one of those things that's learned by example and osmosis, and by having it done unto you. For the people who've been compassionate to you, you're able to offer it back. You can reflect it back. I think you can model it. I think you can, continue consistent behaviors that demonstrate compassion, so people will learn it that way. But I also think people will learn a lot from, like, reading your book. That'll be a great way to teach compassion. I mean, my whole feeling is, when you were talking about people wanting to know about how full their glass is, get a smaller glass. Like if you don't feel compassionate and you think your glass half empty, go get a different glass. Stop it. Stop it. Be there and be present and do this. So yes, I'm going to say a big optimistic fat yes.
Governor?
Well, I would agree with Becca, except for the glass part, but I would say that basically it's run by example. It's done by not telling people what to do, but demonstrating by doing it yourself. And that's where you come in with the multitude of people. And the leadership is important. And that's why I think President Biden's leadership is so appropriate at this moment, because he calls a family that's lost a loved one. He's experienced it. He's very compassionate. He's not weak. He's very strong. He's standing up to Russia. He's standing up to Iran. He's doing the things that need to be done. But on a personal level, he's compassionate with families and individuals that have suffered as he has been through himself. And I think it's a wonderful example to use, to Donato.
No, and this is exactly what we found out in the interviews, that everyone had a story where they transformed their sense of understanding compassion. However, what we did learn is you can, and I thank you, Becca, we are very optimistic that the book and the research that we have conducted, that it will help many leaders to understand that there is a prescriptive course that can be followed to show more compassion. Jim, Joanne, I'm going to have Jim comment on this, and then we're going to turn it over to you to open it up for questions. Jim, do you have any?
Thank you, Don. I do want to offer one additional thought along the lines of the last question, which is I think compassion can be. I don't think we have to teach compassion if we do it right, because I think people are born compassionate, and we beat it out of them over the course of a lot of years. And so many of the existing structures in our society are anti-compassionate. And so what we have to do is sort of recover the compassion that is in the heart of every person, right? And now I'm getting all sort of Neoplatonic on you. So, but I think that's really the key is, it's there at the beginning, and we lose it for a variety of reasons. Fear of lack, a fear of loss, competition, the belief that there are winners and losers in the world, and I want to be a winner, not a loser, right? If we could reimagine how we understand the early years of small children, right, and reimagine how we engage in education at the youngest levels, and so I think for those of us who are not in kindergarten anymore, we have to sort of recover that in some way, and we can look to William Wordsworth for that suggestion. But I think it's there, and it's not like it's a thing we have to sort of import into folks. We have to free what's already there, and which has been sort of plastered over by generations of living in a world which has not valued compassion or empathy or a desire to be with other people. So that's a little bit of a different version, but I think it's a really important part of it.
Well, let me reveal a golden nugget out of the book. Many of you know the theory of the 3.5% movement. If you get 3.5% of the population to peacefully stand behind something, you can win the battle as opposed to using violence. In our research, we come up with the 21% rule, that if you can get 21% of your organization to begin to lead with compassion, you can start to see a movement. Now, you might ask 21, why wasn't it 20? The 2 stands for it takes more than 2, and the 1 is it must begin with you. And so we tear it apart in the book, but I hope that my writer is not going to be upset that I'm letting all these golden nuggets out, but hopefully it'll whet your appetite that we don't talk about just theory in the book. We really do come up with some very prescriptive practices. Joanne, go ahead, Becca.
I have two thoughts and a question real quick. Just, I want to know why the governor doesn't like my funny story about changing the size of your cup. And then I also want to say that just really quickly, what the president was saying, Jim, that we even have many women who have come through the community, they have given themselves street names versus their name from birth. And it was always a sign to me that I had to put on this other persona. But when I came back home, I could reclaim my birth name that was full of love and compassion.
Great. Joanne?
Well, thanks. Now it's time for our participants to address any questions that you might have. Donato, I know there's one that has been circulating a little bit on campus, and maybe I could start with getting things going that you might be able to address. Without divulging too much about the book and your 38 leaders, could you give a little perspective of the 38, you know, age, experience level, maybe in the workforce, and how did you come about to select these 38?
Well, first of all, to take a page out of President Biden's approach to his administration, we wanted them to represent America. And we have a young transgender leader who we interviewed, all the way to, you know, an actor, Matt McCoy, to a, you know, journalist, Katie Couric, to a 16-year-old lad who launched a not-for-profit organization after seeing how his grandmother could not operate a iPhone to get on social media. He started a company that's training seniors how to use social media. To educators, to elected officials, to CEOs of Fortune 50 companies, to CEOs of small companies. And so, and to a wonderful individual whose husband and father-in-law died of COVID. And I think Karen is with us today, whose father and husband died of COVID, and she was in a coma with COVID. And the courage and the remarkable compassion that she displayed and still displays. So it was, Joanne, a remarkable, and you know, my father once said, be happy if you have as many friends as the number of fingers on both of your hands. For whatever reason, God has given me multiple hands because no one said no to me at all. And they committed their time and energy. And I am blessed and humbled by the remarkable participation. And to you, Becca, and Jim, and the governor, and Karen, I think you are with us today. And I do believe that Janine is with us as well. Janine started a not-for-profit foundation that's addressing issues of loneliness. And so it was a remarkable group of people coming together of all demographics profiled.
Wonderful, thank you. Other questions, please enter them in the chat, or if that's uncomfortable for you, certainly speak right up, take yourself off mute and ask your question. Well, I have more to ask then. I don't want to be the only one, but there have been a few questions that have come again from the St. Joseph's College community. And one is the emotional side of this book. You know, Donato, you have spoke to a few classes on campus, and some of our professors have been absolutely shocked by the way you begin a discussion, which is not anything more than tell me your why. Why are you in the position you're in? Why are you teaching your subject? Why are you with me today? And it makes everyone sort of stop in their tracks and try to gather their thoughts and give you an answer. But I also have witnessed, and so has many others, the emotion coming behind really trying to get to know someone. And that has been mentioned on this talk today. The importance of listening, the importance of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So either you or members of the panel, if you could address that, that would be really, I think, helpful.
Panelists, do you want to, and I'll reserve my comments for after the comments by the panelists.
I'll take a stab at answering. I think that it's important I think Donato does ask people, what is your why? But I think it's also important for us to spend time thinking about, in the context of our own lives, what is our why? Right? To ask that question of ourselves, right? To really understand what motivates us, and what what are the elements of our own individual story, life story. And I think there's also a value in asking the organizations which we're part of, what is your why? I have been working for a year or so on this notion that not only do individuals have vocations, but organizations, institutions may have vocations, which is sort of an unconventional way of thinking about that. Because one of the elements of vocation is that it changes over time. It's not always necessarily the same thing. That and you understand the continuing journey, vocational journey, as a result of that continuing self-examination. What am I doing today? How does it connect to what drives me? How does it connect to the deep world, the deep need the world has, which is one of the conventional notions of vocation. So I think it's asking that same question of ourselves and then bringing that understanding back into our engagement with the world. That's important.
Donato, if I could say something in regards to this question, it reinforces the importance of education. I often said to people that, in order to uphold our Constitution, it was about having an educated citizenry. And I think what the president's talked about and what his teachings and education and foundation have been about is about trying to provide that kind of support through education, to be there, to help to stimulate the people and to be able to give people the tools in order for them to figure it out themselves. Sometimes, we rely on, talk radio and 30-second sound bites. And I think education needs to be at the center of this compassion that we're trying to develop and trying to inspire.
Well said. Becca, do you have any thoughts?
I love that you start conversations like that, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I think for me, sometimes I can get lost in the why. So I have to sometimes trust the work more than the inspiration behind the work, the why behind it always. And I know if I keep doing it, if I keep showing up and practicing, compassion on a daily basis and continue to work for justice in my life, that the why sometimes tends to answer itself. It comes back around and I'm like, oh yeah, that's why. And so sometimes if I can keep knowing that just as important is the daily work and what I'm doing, that I can be surprised by the why.
Let me.
Donato, I have a few questions. Oh, excuse me. There are a few other questions coming from the chat room, but please continue and then I'll address them when you're ready.
I think, Joanne, the Dalai Lama said it very well in his book, The Pursuit of Happiness, that to truly understand the pain of someone else, you have to live that pain. For me, having lost my hearing at age 8 and having experienced profound loneliness and being bullied, I failed the 5th grade, voted the most likely not to succeed by my high school classmates. I think when you've experienced the pain, and the governor mentioned Bobby Kennedy, I think Senator Kennedy is one of my heroes. The pain that he experienced after the assassination and death of his brother. And Bobby Kennedy did not start off as a civil rights leader, but he died a civil rights hero. He experienced, when he went to the Mississippi Delta and he experienced the extreme poverty of children living in the United States, and he spent the rest of his remaining years correcting the wrong through public policy change. So I think for me, there were years where nobody really gave a damn about me. They thought I was going to be this deaf kid who was going to amount to nothing. And I have never forgotten that. And I think it's why I don't believe that God makes junk. If God made you, he made you special. And that's the way I approach every situation. And perhaps maybe Some people may feel it's a little bit being naive. I don't think it is at all. And for the few times that you get hurt because you extend yourself to understanding somebody's why, the multiple times that you're rewarded far exceeds those few times when you've been hurt. And so it's the way that I think I've lived my life. And I'm not perfect in doing it all the time. However, for many of you who I think have encountered interactions with me, you know that that usually is the way I approach things, is to really first connect with you, to earn your trust, and then everything else falls into place. Joanne?
Great. So a couple questions that have come about here, and then some points. So empathy and compassion, this comes from Kimberly, are related, but they are two very different things. Can you explain perhaps how they differ, empathy and compassion? And this is directed at you, Donato, please.
Compassion is the umbrella. Empathy is one of those spokes to compassion. There are a lot of folks who are empathetic. I understand what's going on, and then they move on and don't do anything. And so the twin sister to empathy, which defines compassion, is action. And that's what we found when you look at Becca, you look at Jim, you look at the governor, they didn't just understand the issue, they did something. It's what John Lewis, you know, my other hero, said: when you see something wrong, do something, say something. And so compassion and empathy are not related. Empathy is an ingredient to compassion, and it becomes compassion when it's merged with action. Make sense?
Absolutely. Another important question, all of this discussion about compassion, tell us, what are the benefits of compassionate leadership for any organization?
Oh, wow, it's been proven. You know, I've always talked about the double bottom line. You have to put a soul in the company. You can be profitable and you can do good. And you'll find this, I don't want to give it all out in the book, but you'll find that our research and statistics show that the workforce is more energized, the workforce is more committed, the workforce doesn't feel as stressed out, and your productivity is sustainable. You can be profitable and not be compassionate, but the sustainability of that begins to dip off after a few years. So the long-term sustainability of companies that we measured are companies that practice that double bottom line: do good, embrace the employees in a way that they feel that you understand their needs, and focus your attention on being profitable as well.
Okay, now this is a question for the panelists. Being a leader in any organization, no matter what you do, often requires you to listen and to hear certainly stories that are sometimes very painful, very burdensome. And so how do you handle that and take care of yourself and showing others compassion?
Well, great question. One of the questions that we shocked, and I don't know, Becca, Jim, and the governor, I think you were surprised that we asked the question. I know many of the other interviewees felt the same way. But one of the questions we asked each of the 38 participants: how do you show yourself compassion? And it was by far the one question where you could start to see leaders stumbling. And it was a wake-up call that in order to have that ability to really embrace the stories of others, you have to take time for yourself. And we had one individual who is CEO of a Fortune 50 company who basically said there's no such thing as balance. You've got to look at your life as a portfolio. She said, on one day, I may have to spend 70% on my family, only 30% on work, because I've got to get that sense of energy back to my family. Tomorrow, it might be 90% work, but I got to put 10% into myself. And so we've got to be the custodian of making sure that we take care of ourselves. I just saw a message that came in: self-care, absolutely. And I think what we triggered in each of the participants' go forward approach is they all committed to taking more time for themselves. Don't feel guilty when you walk away from your job completely for 3 hours, because you're going to get back to it later on.
You know, with that answer, can I ask Donato, please, I know one of the individuals that you interviewed was Sister Mary Scullion. Sister Mary Scullion, who is involved as the leader and founder of Project Home in Philadelphia, taking care of the homeless. She too was a honorary recipient at a commencement, receiving an honorary degree. And like you, she has that connection to St. Joseph's as a Sister of Mercy. Talk to me a little bit about, you know, just what it was like to experience Sister Mary Scullion and her work.
Well, let me take the one word from the book that that we've used to describe Sister Mary, and that's courage. That she went into an area where, as you know, the community fought her in terms of providing these homes. And what we found as a common denominator in all of these leaders was the amazing courage. However, she displayed courage that would break, if you will, the measurement scale of 1 to 10. She was like a, 1,000. She was willing to take on the issue because she felt, in her own words, that she couldn't just empathize with those who were homeless. She was going to carry it through to complete it in terms of full action. So it was a very touching experience and very validating, because we started to uncover early on that courage was the other variable to compassion, that you could have empathy, you could want to do something. However, you have to have courage. And look at what we're faced with today. Look at the companies that stood out after the George Floyd murder, and they took an enormous stance. You have to be willing to be, if you will, the microphone and to be the platform that so many others may not be able to, to join at that moment. However, when they hear you and they see what you're doing, they're able to jump on board. And Sister Mary was certainly one of those amazing individuals that displayed that.
Okay, thank you. So this question is posed to each member of the panel, and then probably ending with you, Donato. What do you suppose it is that energizes movements of people? Why do you think now is the time for this movement of compassionate leadership and compassionate action? Let's start with Becca, and then we'll go to the governor and President DeLugas and end with you, Donato. Becca, please.
I would be remiss if I didn't say that Thistle Farms is an amazing bath and body care company. And if all of you who are a part of this want to do any self-care, you need to go online and buy your bath soaks, your anointing oils, your beautiful candles, and you will live in peace and harmony and be full of compassion for every person in the whole wide world. So that's my only commercial I will say. If you want to know more about it, please, you can DM me. I'm on Instagram all the time, Becca Stevens. And I can tell you all about what our community's like as we close. I know we don't have time to talk about all that. I just want to say, I think, you know, a lot of times, even in our justice work, we don't even do that justice work very compassionately. I mean, one of the things I love about what Donato was speaking about is that it's the way we are doing this with one another, that the reason this is the time is that we are all awake. We're all, you know, the pandemic has done nothing but unearth some of the shallow buried injustices, but also reminded us of our connectivity. I mean, the word divine just comes from of the vine. We're connected. We are together. And that's what makes this a holy and beautiful way of doing it. But to do our work with lavishness is one of the best ways I know for self-care. Sometimes I think we think if we're building a church, we can build a cathedral and it can be inspiring and amazing. But if we're doing something in the name of justice for someone who is in prison or on the streets, we think we have to build something really bad and cheap, and it's got to be, you know, this economic thing. And I just want to say that in this world of compassion, even how we do that work to make it lovingly and lavish for people so that they can experience that is very, very important. And it's uplifting as you are doing it. The very last thing I want to say, and then I will not say anything else for the rest of this time, is that when I remember that I mostly came into this work as a beggar, it's easy to show compassion for others. You know, I experienced the death of my father when I was 5 by a drunk driver, subsequently experienced several years of child abuse, sexual trauma that began at the church. And I think I was so longing for community that was safe and loving that it's true that, you know, I'm so grateful I still get to be a part of it and can do this work. So it doesn't feel like it's about burnout. It feels like when you're doing it in a community that allows you to feel lavish and cared for in the hardest work you can do, that there's space for much joy. I have loved being a part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Becca.
Thank you, Becca. So, Governor, could you also address that question? What energizes movements and people, and why do you think the time is now for this movement on compassionate leadership?
Well, I think that, Joanne, first of all, I think Becca's her recitation was just very inspiring. And I think that it is something that we should all pause at. It's frankly hard to follow that. Mm-hmm. But I think that, she may use the smaller glass than myself, but I just used it as a metaphor. You want to big, not downsize. We want to supersize. And we want people to be inspired to do even more. So I think that my sense is that, as we do things and help people, that we actually get more out of it. I've heard more people talk about, I have a special needs neighbor. And I found that I actually been helping the family, but I actually feel like I'm getting more out of it than I'm giving, and it's that kind of recharging of the internal soul that I think keeps pumping away, because when you do good, or you're not doing it because you want to feel good or you're doing it in a selfish way, but you just want to be helpful, it comes back at you, and it's not because you want it to, but it just does. And I think that that's very, it's something that catches people, and all of a sudden they start talking about, that they really gain more themselves. And so I think doing good is being good and getting good. So.
Yes.
Thank you, Governor. Always good to hear your words. Thank you. Jim, how about your comment on that, please? Thank you, Governor.
Sure. Thanks, Joanna. So I sometimes will talk about the gifts of the pandemic when I'm trying to be annoying to people. But I think this is the moment, because everything else that's been going on, the violence in our streets, the abuse of police powers, the disparities in healthcare, the disparities in education, the disparities in the economic systems have been going on for a very long time. They're not new. What's new is that the disruption of the pandemic has forced us to see all these things in a new way. Yeah. And so I think this moment is the right moment, because, and I'm going to preview a little bit of what I'm writing into the commencement address I'll give in a week and a half's time. I'm going to challenge our graduates to not aspire for things to go back to normal. If our goal is to get back to normal, we will have missed a great opportunity to move things forward. Everyone talks about, when are things going to get back to normal? No, that's wrong. That's the wrong aspiration, right? And I think all these things have come together in a way that we can actually think about it and talk about it. And so the goal is to create a new world where some of these things begin to get addressed, but the energy is there to continue to address them going forward. And so it's not normal we're going back to. We better not be going back to it. Otherwise, we will have missed one of the great gifts of the pandemic will have been wasted on us.
Thank you, Jim. And now Donato. Donato, you're on mute. Go ahead.
Am I mute?
No, you're not. Go ahead.
First of all, my profound thanks to the three panelists and to all of you who have joined this session today. Movements are started by shared interest. And the fact that all of you are here today really does validate we have a shared interest in this. Jim, I agree with you. There is no new normal. We have a new abnormal. And this may be the first time in many generations that we all have lost something in the last year. we all have suffered in so many different ways, whether it's been through the loss of a loved one, the way Becca and her family have suffered, or whether it's been through enormous loss of a job or social isolation. We have all suffered dearly, and there's that shared interest that our forefathers in the Declaration of Independence indicated life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For whatever reason, we have violated that last one, where happiness is not a common denominator for everyone. And I think we have a shared interest in getting that back. And I believe you can get it back. It's not going to happen overnight. This is why we're calling it a movement. However, if each and every one of us today can extract some of those golden nuggets around compassion, and once the book is out, we can travel across this great country and the world and help others to lead with compassion, then I do believe that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness will be the common denominator of how we all live our lives for the future.
Well, that seems to be a perfect way to end this wonderful session, Donato. I do want to make one comment by a participant who asked a question, and that is, would it be possible to host a seminar in Maine on this subject and possibly on the campus of St. Joseph's College? And of course, I'm smiling because I know you've had that discussion with Jim DeLucas and others, and we intend to do that on an annual basis. And the question came from an individual who said they were originally from Maine and they love that Yankee accent. So we'll be hearing it from Donato and the theme and the topic of compassionate leadership. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much. And thank you to St. Joseph's College for hosting this today. And Karen, I see your wonderful smile. Thank you for your courage, and to Janine, who were involved in the interviewing panel. And again, to Katie Eaton and our wonderful staff member, Catherine. I don't know, is Tammy, my writer, is she here with us? Tammy, you can't leave this without me giving you such great thanks and praise. She was, I am telling you, talk about an amazing, compassionate individual, a highly talented writer. She's been with me every inch along the way, but I'm going to leave you with a great story that her 14-year-old son, Austin, who was with us when we had our first kickoff meeting, I was asking everybody what compassion meant. And I was looking at her son, and I felt that he wanted to speak. And I said, Austin, what does compassion mean to you? And this was his definition. Compassion is not being kind to those you know, it's being kind to everyone. That's from a 14-year-old. And doesn't that say a lot about his mom and his parents and his upbringing? Thank you all. Make it a great evening. You've made my day. Becca, thank you. Governor, thank you. And Jim, thank you very much. Joanne, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.